Most people are taught that manifestation moves forward. You visualize something, you attract it, and eventually, you achieve it. That is the standard formula repeated in books, courses, and teachings all over the world. First you imagine the future, then you work toward it. And if everything goes well, one day it becomes real. But what if that entire sequence is backwards? What if the reason manifestation feels slow, inconsistent, or out of reach for so many people is because they are starting from the wrong end of the process? Quantum manifestation suggests something radically different. It proposes that reality does not unfold from desire toward fulfillment. Instead, it unfolds from the outcome backward. In other words, you do not manifest from wanting, you manifest from the state of the result. And when this inversion is understood, something remarkable begins to happen. Manifestation stops feeling like effort. It begins to feel like alignment, and the distance between intention and reality starts collapsing in ways that seem almost impossible. So in this exploration, we will look at a question that quietly changes everything. What if manifestation was never meant to move forward at all? What if it was always meant to begin at the end? You have probably heard the same manifestation advice many times. Visualize your goals clearly. Picture the life you want in detail. Feel the emotions as if it were already happening. This guidance appears everywhere. Books repeat it. Coaches teach it. Videos explain it. Close your eyes. Imagine the house, the career, the relationship, the abundance. Feel gratitude, feel excitement, feel certainty, and for a moment, it can feel powerful. But then something strange happens. Even after hours of visualization, after affirmations, after trying to maintain a positive emotional state, the reality itself still feels slightly out of reach, almost as if the life you want exists somewhere just beyond your grasp. Close enough to imagine, but not close enough to experience. And many people quietly begin asking themselves the same question. If manifestation is supposed to work this way, why does it often feel like you are constantly reaching towards something that never quite arrives? Why does the desired reality still feel like a future event rather than a present experience? The answer may be uncomfortable, because most manifestation teachings overlook something extremely important. When you repeatedly visualize something as a future outcome, you may actually be reinforcing the distance between yourself and what you want. Every time the mind says, "One day this will happen," it is also saying, "It is not happening now." And the moment reality is framed as "not now," a subtle energetic signal begins to broadcast. Not presence, but absence. This is where manifestation begins to reveal a deeper paradox. Because the problem is not visualization itself. The problem is where the mind is standing while it visualizes. Most people visualize their desires from a very specific psychological position. They imagine the life they want from the perspective of someone who does not yet have it. They imagine abundance while internally feeling that abundance is still coming. They imagine love while sensing that love is still somewhere in the future. They imagine success while quietly believing that success is still ahead of them. And although this seems harmless, energetically it creates a very precise signal, a signal of distance. Think about the language that often appears in manifestation practices. I want abundance. I want success. I want the perfect relationship. On the surface, these statements sound positive, but underneath them is a hidden assumption. Wanting something means it is not currently present. Desire always implies separation. And this is the subtle trap. Every time the mind says, "I want," it is also confirming a reality where the desired experience is absent. Not here, not now, still ahead. From the perspective of the quantum field, that distinction matters. Because the field does not respond to what you intellectually hope for. It responds to the state you consistently embody. If your internal state is wanting, the signal being broadcast is not fulfillment, it is longing. And the quantum field mirrors that state with remarkable precision. It reflects the frequency you stabilize in, not the future you imagine, but the present identity you inhabit. So if the dominant internal message is, "I am still trying to get there," reality tends to organize itself around that same pattern. More trying, more reaching, more waiting, more distance between intention and outcome. This is the point where quantum manifestation introduces a completely different orientation. Instead of approaching reality from desire, it asks you to approach reality from the outcome itself, not imagining that the result will eventually happen, but stepping into the internal state where it has already happened. And this is a crucial distinction, because the moment the mind shifts from wanting to having, the entire energetic broadcast changes. Desire says, "This does not exist yet." Outcome says, "This is already part of my reality." Desire generates effort. Outcome generates coherence. Desire creates movement towards something. Outcome creates alignment with something. From the perspective of the quantum field, these two states produce entirely different reflections. And once this difference becomes clear, manifestation stops being a process of chasing a future. It becomes a process of stabilizing an identity. Not the identity of someone who wants, but the identity of someone who already is. To understand this reversal more clearly, imagine something simple. Imagine watching a film. Normally, you watch a story unfold from beginning to end. The opening introduces uncertainty. Characters face challenges. Conflicts arise. And as the story moves forward, you naturally wonder how everything will resolve. Will the hero succeed? Will the problem be solved? Will things finally work out? That uncertainty is part of the experience. Now imagine something very different. Instead of starting the movie at the beginning, you begin at the final scene. You see the resolution first. You see the moment where everything has already unfolded. The conflict is over. The outcome is clear. The story has already reached completion. And only after seeing that ending, you begin watching the events that led to it. Something interesting happens when you watch a story in this way. Your relationship with the unfolding events changes completely. When obstacles appear, you are no longer anxious. You already know the resolution. When tension rises in the story, you don't doubt what will happen. You already witnessed the ending. Every event that once looked uncertain now becomes part of a process that is already resolved. You are no longer watching a story of possibility. You are watching a story of inevitability. Quantum manifestation works in a surprisingly similar way. Most people try to live life as if they are watching the beginning of the movie. They look at the present moment and think, how will this work out? How will things change? When will the outcome appear? Their attention stays fixed on the unfolding process. But quantum manifestation invites you to shift perspective. Instead of starting from the beginning of the story, you begin from the ending. You mentally and emotionally place yourself inside the final scene, not as imagination of something that might happen, but as an experience of something that already exists. From that position, something subtle begins to change internally. The urgency begins to soften. The tension that often accompanies desire begins to dissolve. Because from the perspective of the ending, the outcome is no longer uncertain. It is already part of the story. And once the nervous system begins to stabilize in that state, your internal frequency changes. You are no longer reacting to life as someone waiting for results. You are perceiving life as someone living inside a result that has already unfolded. In that state, doubt loses its grip. Anxiety loses its momentum. And the emotional broadcast that once carried urgency begins to shift into something very different: certainty, presence, completion. From the perspective of the quantum field, this shift matters enormously, because the field responds not to the events of your life, but to the state from which you observe them. And when observation begins from the end of the story, reality itself begins organizing differently around you. At this point, a natural question begins to arise. Is this idea simply philosophical, or does it actually reflect something real about the structure of the universe? Interestingly, modern physics has begun revealing something that sounds remarkably similar to what quantum manifestation suggests. At the quantum level, reality does not behave the way our everyday intuition expects. Objects are not always fixed and solid. Events are not always arranged in a strict line from past to future. Instead, what scientists repeatedly observe is something far stranger. Before measurement occurs, particles do not exist as definite objects. They exist as waves of probability, possibilities, multiple potential outcomes existing simultaneously. Only when observation occurs does the wave collapse into a specific result. This phenomenon became famous through experiments such as the double-slit experiment, where particles behave like waves of possibility until they are measured. And the moment observation takes place, the wave collapses into a specific particle state. In simple terms, reality at the quantum level appears to exist first as potential. Then observation selects one outcome, not the other way around. This idea becomes even more intriguing when we look at research exploring retrocausality. Some quantum experiments suggest that events in the present may influence outcomes that appear to originate in the past. In other words, the boundary between past, present, and future may not be as fixed as it seems. Instead of a straight timeline moving from yesterday to tomorrow, quantum physics increasingly suggests something more complex. A field of possibilities. A landscape where multiple potential realities coexist simultaneously, and where observation plays a decisive role in determining which possibility becomes experienced reality. When viewed through this lens, manifestation begins to look very different. It is no longer about forcing something into existence. It becomes a process of selecting from possibilities that already exist. Every potential version of your life, every path, every outcome, already exists as a probability within the quantum field. You are not creating reality from nothing. You are interacting with a field of potential realities. And the state from which you observe that field matters. Because observation is not neutral, observation carries identity, it carries expectation, it carries emotional frequency. And according to quantum theory, those factors influence which possibilities collapse into measurable events. This is where the idea of manifesting from the outcome becomes particularly interesting. When your internal state stabilizes around the experience of an outcome already being real, your observation changes. You are no longer observing reality from uncertainty. You are observing it from completion. And from the perspective of the quantum field, that shift alters which probabilities become most likely to collapse. It changes the resonance between observer and possibility, which means manifestation is not about demanding something from the universe. It is about aligning your internal state with the version of reality you are already observing as real. When that alignment becomes stable enough, the field responds accordingly, not because of belief alone, but because resonance between observer and outcome has been established. To make this idea easier to visualize, imagine something for a moment. Imagine that the quantum field is like an immense library. Not a normal library with a few shelves and a few hundred books, but a vast, almost infinite archive. Row after row of shelves extending farther than the eye can see. And on those shelves are books. Each book contains a complete story. But these are not ordinary stories. Each book represents a possible version of your life. One book contains the life where certain opportunities appeared. Another book contains the life where different choices were made. Another contains the life where a relationship unfolded in a completely different way. Another holds the timeline where abundance arrived sooner. Another holds the timeline where a new path emerged unexpectedly. Every possible direction your life could take already exists somewhere in that library. Not as imagination, but as potential realities encoded in the quantum field. From this perspective, manifestation begins to look very different. It is no longer about writing the book of your life page by page from the beginning. You are not starting with an empty page trying to invent something that does not exist yet. Instead, you are standing inside a library where the books are already written. The stories already exist. The endings already exist. What changes is which book you choose to open. Most people approach manifestation as if they are trying to write the book themselves. They think they must create every chapter through effort, planning, and control. They try to construct the future step by step. But the quantum perspective suggests something far more subtle. The future is not something you build, it is something you align with. When you begin manifesting from the outcome, what you are actually doing is selecting a different book from the shelf. You are choosing a version of reality where the outcome already exists. And once that choice becomes emotionally and mentally coherent, you begin experiencing the story from inside that book. In other words, you stop trying to invent the future. You start inhabiting a timeline that already exists. And this is why manifestation often appears effortless for some people. They are not forcing the story to change. They are simply reading from a different book. Their internal state aligns with a different version of reality. And because the quantum field reflects the state of the observer, their external world gradually begins to resemble the timeline they have aligned with. Opportunities appear, encounters shift, circumstances rearrange themselves. Not because the universe suddenly created something new, but because the observer has tuned into a different probability within the field. When seen this way, manifestation is less like constructing something from scratch, and more like choosing which story you are ready to experience. The story already exists. The question is simply, which version of reality are you observing from? At this point, another question naturally appears. If reality truly responds to alignment and internal state, why do some people seem to manifest results so effortlessly while others struggle for years? You may have noticed this dynamic in your own life. Some individuals appear to move through opportunities almost naturally. Doors open for them. Encounters happen at the right moment. Solutions appear in ways that seem almost perfectly timed. From the outside, it can look like luck, or timing, or some mysterious advantage that only a few people possess. Meanwhile, many others spend years trying to manifest similar outcomes. They study techniques, they repeat affirmations, they visualize intensely. They attempt method after method, hoping something will finally work. Yet the results often remain inconsistent. This contrast leads many people to believe that manifestation must depend on talent or spiritual development, or perhaps some special gift. But the difference is often much simpler. It usually comes down to the relationship a person has with their own desires. Most people approach manifestation from a state of effort. They feel that if they want something strongly enough, they must push harder toward it. More visualization, more emotional intensity, more effort, more attempts to control the process. But effort often carries a hidden signal. It implies that something is not yet available. It suggests that the outcome still needs to be forced into existence. And when that subtle tension becomes the dominant emotional frequency, the quantum field mirrors it. More striving, more searching, more reaching. On the other hand, people who seem to manifest effortlessly often operate from a very different internal position. Instead of chasing the result, they quietly assume the reality of the outcome. They do not obsess over how something will happen. They stabilize themselves in the identity of someone for whom the outcome is natural. From that state, their actions become calmer, their decisions become clearer, their energy becomes less reactive, and something interesting begins to occur. Because when the nervous system no longer broadcasts urgency or lack, the field stops reflecting those states back. The signal changes. Instead of transmitting tension, the observer begins transmitting coherence. And coherence has a very particular quality. It feels calm, certain, grounded. It does not demand, it does not chase. It simply embodies a state where the outcome is already integrated into identity. From the outside, this may look like confidence, or intuition, or timing. But from a quantum perspective, something else may be happening. The observer has aligned with a version of reality where the outcome is already normal, and once that alignment stabilizes, the external world gradually begins to reorganize around it. Opportunities appear that match the identity being embodied. Decisions begin leading naturally toward the outcome. Interactions shift. Paths that once seemed unlikely begin to open. Not because the universe suddenly decided to reward effort, but because the observer is no longer broadcasting the frequency of lack. They are transmitting something entirely different: completion. To understand this process more clearly, imagine something familiar. Imagine an old radio receiver. Inside the radio, there is a dial. By turning that dial slowly, you can tune into different stations. Each station already exists. One station is broadcasting music. Another is broadcasting news. Another is broadcasting a conversation. The signals are already present in the air around you. They are not created the moment you turn the dial. They are already there. Your radio simply selects which signal becomes audible. When the dial is not aligned with a specific station, the sound becomes distorted. You hear static, fragments of signal mixed with noise. But the moment the dial reaches the correct frequency, something changes instantly. The music becomes clear. The transmission stabilizes. The signal was always present. The only thing that changed was the alignment of the receiver. Quantum manifestation can be understood in a similar way. Every potential outcome you could experience already exists as a probability within the quantum field. Different possibilities, different timelines, different versions of events. You are not creating those possibilities from nothing. They already exist as signals within the field of reality. Your internal state functions like the tuning dial of that radio. Your emotional coherence, your identity, your expectations, your perception of what is natural for you, all of these factors influence the frequency you are broadcasting. When the internal signal carries tension, doubt, or absence, the reception of reality reflects those qualities. Experiences appear inconsistent. Opportunities feel unstable. Circumstances fluctuate. But when your internal state stabilizes in coherence, something begins to shift. Your perception becomes clearer. Your responses become more grounded. And gradually, the version of reality that matches that frequency begins to appear more consistently. In other words, manifestation is not the act of forcing a signal into existence. It is the act of tuning into the signal that already exists. Just as the radio does not create the music, the observer does not create possibility. The observer aligns with it. Once the frequency matches the broadcast, the experience becomes inevitable. At this point, the idea may feel intriguing, but another question naturally begins to form. If manifestation really works through alignment with the outcome, how does this translate into everyday life? What does it actually look like to live from the end of the story? Because understanding the concept intellectually is only the beginning. The real transformation happens when the idea becomes something you experience internally. Many people hear the principle of outcome-based manifestation and immediately wonder, what am I supposed to do differently tomorrow morning? How does this change the way I think? How does this change the way I move through my day? The answer is surprisingly simple. Quantum manifestation does not require complicated rituals. It does not depend on long hours of visualization, and it does not require forcing emotional intensity. Instead, the process can be understood through three simple shifts in perspective. Three internal adjustments that gradually move the observer from desire into embodiment. These shifts may appear subtle at first, but once they are practiced consistently, they begin altering the entire relationship between identity and reality. Because manifestation, from a quantum perspective, is not about convincing the universe to deliver something. It is about aligning your internal state with a reality that already exists as a possibility. Once that alignment stabilizes, reality begins responding naturally. So rather than introducing a complex system, it is easier to think of the process as three movements, three ways of repositioning your attention and identity. The first movement is clarity, the second is embodiment, and the third is release. Each one plays a specific role in stabilizing your alignment with the outcome. And when these three elements begin working together, manifestation becomes far less about effort and far more about coherence. Let's explore the first one. The first shift is clarity, but not the type of clarity most manifestation teachings describe. Many people approach manifestation by imagining a future they hope to experience someday. They think about what they would like to achieve, what they would like to change, what they would like to become. But in quantum manifestation, the starting point is slightly different. Instead of visualizing a future that might eventually arrive, you begin by choosing a reality that already exists within the field of possibility. And you approach it from the perspective that it is already part of your life. This does not mean pretending. It does not mean forcing belief. It means shifting the position from which you observe your life. For a moment, imagine a simple example. Suppose the reality you wish to experience involves financial stability. Traditional manifestation often suggests imagining yourself becoming financially secure in the future. You picture the moment when it finally happens. But this still places the experience ahead of you. It keeps the identity of the observer positioned in the present moment as someone who does not yet have it. Quantum manifestation begins from a different place. Instead of imagining the moment when stability arrives, you imagine the version of yourself who already lives inside that reality. The focus moves away from the event and toward the identity. You begin observing the world from the perspective of the person who already experiences that condition. What would your day feel like? What would your thoughts naturally sound like? How would your attention move through the world if this reality were already normal for you? Notice the difference. You are no longer visualizing something that may eventually happen. You are stepping into the internal perspective of someone for whom it is already happening. This subtle shift changes the emotional signal being broadcast. Instead of projecting hope into the future, you stabilize awareness in the present moment. The identity changes first, and identity is the lens through which observation happens. When the observer changes, the interpretation of reality begins changing as well. Situations that once looked uncertain may begin appearing as temporary transitions. Opportunities that once seemed invisible may begin to stand out more clearly. Your perception reorganizes, and perception in many ways is the gateway through which reality unfolds. The key in this first step is not intensity, it is clarity of perspective. Choosing a reality and allowing your mind and body to experience the viewpoint of someone who already inhabits that version of life. Not someday, but now. Once the desired reality becomes clear, the next shift begins. This is where manifestation becomes deeply transformative, because the second movement is not about imagination, it is about identity. Most people approach manifestation by trying to acquire something. They focus on obtaining a result, achieving a goal, receiving a circumstance. But quantum manifestation invites a different question. Not, what do I want to have? But, who is the version of me that already has this? Because every reality corresponds to a particular identity. The version of you who lives one life is not thinking, feeling, or perceiving in exactly the same way as the version of you living another. Identity shapes perception. Perception shapes reaction, and reaction gradually shapes the path your life follows. When manifestation is approached from desire, the identity remains unchanged. The observer still experiences themselves as someone trying to get somewhere, still moving toward a result. still waiting for confirmation. But when manifestation begins from the outcome, identity shifts first. You begin inhabiting the perspective of the person who already lives inside that reality. And this is not a matter of repeating words mechanically. It is a matter of allowing your nervous system to settle into a different state. Notice what happens in your body when you truly accept a reality. Breathing becomes slower. Posture relaxes. The sense of urgency begins dissolving because the mind is no longer trying to reach something distant. It is stabilizing inside something that feels already present. This is why embodiment matters so much. The quantum field does not respond to the sentences you repeat. It responds to the state your entire system is broadcasting, your thoughts, your emotions, your physiology, your expectations. All of these elements together form a signal. And when that signal carries the coherence of fulfillment, reality begins organizing differently around you. You are no longer behaving like someone chasing a future. You are behaving like someone inhabiting a present. Even subtle changes in identity can influence perception. A conversation may feel different. A decision may appear clearer. An opportunity may become visible that previously went unnoticed. Because identity determines what the mind considers normal. When the identity of the observer shifts, the definition of what feels possible also begins shifting. And over time, the experiences that match that identity begin appearing more frequently. Not because the universe suddenly decided to deliver something new, but because the observer has stabilized in a state where that reality already belongs. Once clarity is established and identity begins to shift, the third movement becomes essential: release. This step is often the most challenging for the mind, because the mind is naturally oriented toward control. It wants to understand how things will happen. It wants to calculate timelines. It wants to predict outcomes. And when something important is desired, the instinct to control the process becomes even stronger. But from the perspective of quantum manifestation, this impulse can unintentionally interfere with alignment. The moment the mind begins obsessing over the path, it moves attention away from the outcome. Instead of stabilizing in the state of completion, the observer returns to a state of uncertainty. Questions begin appearing. How will this happen? When will this appear? What if it does not work? And with those questions comes tension. The nervous system tightens, expectation turns into pressure, and the internal signal once again begins reflecting doubt. This is why the final step in outcome-based manifestation is surrender. Not surrender in the sense of giving up, but surrender in the sense of releasing the need to control the unfolding. When you plant a seed in the ground, you do not dig it up every day to check whether it is growing. You prepare the soil, you place the seed, you allow the conditions for growth, and then you let nature perform the rest of the process. The seed knows how to grow. The soil knows how to support it. The process unfolds according to an intelligence far more complex than conscious control. Manifestation follows a similar principle. Once clarity and identity are aligned with the outcome, the most supportive action is often to allow the process to unfold naturally. The quantum field contains countless pathways through which an outcome can emerge. Unexpected encounters, new opportunities, unplanned events, moments of synchronicity. When the mind insists on controlling the route, it often narrows the range of possibilities. It assumes that the outcome must arrive through a specific method, a specific timeline, a specific sequence. But the field of possibilities is far larger than any single plan. Releasing control opens the space for those possibilities to move. It allows reality to organize itself in ways the analytical mind could not have predicted. And this is where manifestation begins to feel different. Less like pushing a heavy object uphill, and more like aligning with a current that is already flowing. Instead of forcing events, you allow coherence to guide the unfolding. Instead of managing every step, you maintain the internal state that matches the destination. And from that place of relaxed alignment, Life begins arranging circumstances with surprising precision. Not because the universe has been convinced, but because the observer is no longer interfering with the signal they are broadcasting. Understanding these principles intellectually is valuable, but the real transformation begins when they are practiced consistently. Because alignment is not something achieved once and then forgotten. It becomes a state that is gradually stabilized. One simple way to begin cultivating that state is through a small daily practice. Not something complicated, not something that requires a long ritual. Just a brief moment each day where you consciously reconnect with the outcome you have chosen. A useful moment for this practice is the beginning of the day, right after waking up, before the mind becomes absorbed in tasks, messages, responsibilities, and external demands. In those first quiet minutes, your mind is naturally more receptive. Your attention has not yet been pulled outward, and this makes it easier to shift into a coherent state. Before getting out of bed, pause for a moment. Allow yourself to remember the reality you chose, not as something you hope will appear someday, but as something that already exists within the field of possibility. Then gently place your awareness inside the version of yourself who already lives that reality. Notice what that version of you feels like, not dramatically, not with exaggerated emotion, but with a quiet sense of familiarity. How would your day begin if this reality were already natural for you? How would you move through the morning? What kind of decisions would feel obvious? What would your attention focus on? Let the mind briefly experience that perspective. Allow the emotional tone of that reality to appear. It might feel like calm confidence, or relief, or gratitude, or a subtle sense of stability. Remain in that state for a few minutes. There is no need to force anything. No need to maintain the feeling for long periods of time. Just allow the nervous system to register that state, then release it. Let the day unfold naturally. Throughout the day, moments of doubt may still appear. This is normal. Old patterns of thought do not disappear instantly. When those moments arise, there is no need to fight them. Instead, simply pause for a moment and remember the perspective you practiced earlier. Remind yourself gently, it is already unfolding. Not as a forced affirmation, but as a quiet return to alignment. Then continue with your day. Over time, something interesting begins to happen. The state you practiced in the morning gradually becomes more familiar. Your reactions become calmer. Your decisions become clearer. And the emotional tone you carry into situations begins to change. Instead of operating from tension or urgency, you begin moving through life with a sense of relaxed expectation. And when that expectation stabilizes, the reflection you experience in the external world begins to shift as well. At this point, it may be helpful to remember something from your own life. Most people have experienced at least one moment where something meaningful happened in a way that felt almost unexpected. A moment when a solution appeared, an opportunity arrived, or a connection emerged that changed the direction of events. And often, those moments share a similar pattern. They tend to appear after a period of effort, but only once the effort relaxes. Perhaps you remember a time when you were searching intensely for an opportunity, sending messages, making plans, trying to control every step of the process, and nothing seemed to move. But then, after some time passed, something shifted internally. The urgency softened, the mind stopped pushing, and almost unexpectedly, something appeared. An email, a conversation, an invitation. A possibility that had not been visible before. Or perhaps you experience this dynamic in relationships. There are moments when someone tries very hard to create a connection, trying to say the right things, trying to guide the outcome, trying to make something happen. Yet the interaction feels tense, unnatural, as if the situation is being forced. And then, at another moment, when that pressure disappears, Connection happens naturally. Conversation flows easily. The atmosphere becomes lighter. What changed in those moments? Often the external circumstances had not changed dramatically. What changed was the internal state of the observer. The moment effort relaxed, alignment appeared. And once alignment appeared, events began unfolding differently. Many people describe these moments as coincidence, or luck, or perfect timing. But when viewed through the lens of quantum alignment, something else may be happening. When the observer stops pushing against the current, they begin moving with it. Instead of forcing reality to follow a plan, they allow reality to reveal pathways that were previously invisible. The mind often believes that doing more will produce better results. But in many situations, the opposite becomes true. Excessive effort introduces tension, and tension disrupts coherence. The moment the observer returns to a state of calm alignment, possibilities that once seemed distant begin appearing within reach. Not because the universe suddenly decided to intervene, but because the internal signal being broadcast has changed. The observer is no longer transmitting urgency. They are transmitting trust, and trust stabilizes coherence. Once coherence stabilizes, the reflection in the external world begins to shift as well. At this point in the exploration, something subtle may already be shifting. Not necessarily in external circumstances, but in the way you are observing them. Because once the idea of manifesting from the outcome becomes clear, the relationship between observer and reality begins to transform. Instead of asking, "How do I make this happen?" a different question quietly emerges. What would change if I began observing life from the state where it is already unfolding? This shift may seem small, but in many ways, it marks the beginning of a different relationship with reality itself. Instead of chasing possibilities, you begin aligning with them. Instead of waiting for confirmation, you begin stabilizing in coherence. And sometimes, a simple, conscious declaration can help anchor that shift. Not as a ritual of effort, but as a moment of awareness. If this idea resonates with you, you might take a moment to reflect on it. You can write something simple in the comments. A phrase like, "Reality responds to alignment," not as a slogan, but as a reminder of the principle we explored here. Each time the mind encounters that phrase again, it can serve as a small signal, a reminder that manifestation may not be about forcing outcomes, but about stabilizing the state from which reality is observed. And often, small moments of awareness like this begin changing perception in ways that gradually influence experience itself. Now that the foundation has become clearer, another question naturally begins to emerge. If manifestation can begin from the outcome, is there a way to strengthen that alignment even further? A way to make the connection between observer and desired reality even more stable? Interestingly, there is a technique that explores exactly that possibility. It is sometimes called backcasting. While traditional planning moves forward from the present toward the future, backcasting moves in the opposite direction. It begins at the destination, and from there, it allows the path to reveal itself naturally. Instead of asking, "How do I reach this outcome from where I am now?" backcasting begins with a different perspective. If this outcome already exists, what must have unfolded for this reality to become natural? The mind briefly places itself at the point where the result already exists, and from that perspective, it looks backward. Not to control every step, but to recognize how the unfolding could appear. This shift changes something subtle in perception. Instead of the future feeling distant or uncertain, it begins to feel like a story that has already been written, and the present moment becomes simply one scene within that story. From that perspective, the path often feels clearer. Actions begin to appear more obvious. Decisions feel less forced. Not because every step is known in advance, but because the observer is no longer navigating from uncertainty. They are navigating from the awareness of an outcome that already exists within the field of possibility. Backcasting is one of the ways people strengthen that awareness. It helps the mind step into the end of the story, and then gently allow the present to reorganize around it. And when this perspective stabilizes, manifestation begins to feel less like effort and more like remembering a path that was already there. We will explore this idea more deeply in another exploration, because once the mind understands how to move between present awareness and future outcomes in this way, the experience of reality can change in surprising ways. If there is one idea worth carrying from this exploration, it may be this: manifestation may not be about forcing reality to change. It may be about changing the position from which reality is observed. For a long time, many teachings have suggested that life must be pursued with effort, that outcomes must be pushed into existence, that the future is something distant, slowly built through struggle and persistence. But the quantum perspective introduces another possibility. Perhaps reality is less rigid than it appears. Perhaps the future is not something that needs to be created from nothing. Perhaps it already exists within a field of possibilities waiting to be experienced. And if that is true, then manifestation becomes something very different from what most people imagine. It becomes less about chasing a future, and more about aligning with a version of reality that already exists. The observer changes first. Identity shifts, perception reorganizes, and gradually, the external world begins reflecting that change. Not instantly, not magically, but coherently. Life begins moving in ways that feel less forced. Decisions become clearer. Encounters happen at unexpected moments, and paths that once seemed unlikely begin to reveal themselves naturally. Not because the universe suddenly decided to grant a wish, but because the observer is no longer transmitting the signal of absence. They are transmitting the signal of completion. In that state, manifestation stops feeling like a struggle. It becomes a process of alignment, a quiet adjustment in frequency. A shift in the story the observer is living inside, and once that shift becomes stable, the boundary between intention and experience begins to soften, which raises an interesting possibility. Perhaps the reality you are seeking is not somewhere far ahead in time. Perhaps it already exists within the field, waiting for the observer who is ready to experience it. The quantum field does not respond to pressure. It does not move because we demand results. It responds to coherence, to the internal state from which reality is observed. When the observer stabilizes in tension, reality often reflects tension. When the observer stabilizes in absence, reality often reflects absence. But when the observer stabilizes in alignment, something subtle begins to change. Life begins responding differently, not because the universe has been convinced, but because the signal being transmitted has changed. And once that signal becomes clear, possibilities that once seemed distant begin appearing within reach. Perhaps manifestation has never been about trying harder. Perhaps it has always been about seeing differently, about stepping into the perspective where the outcome is no longer a distant event, but a reality already present within the field of possibility. And when the observer begins living from that perspective, the boundary between intention and experience begins to dissolve. Reality stops feeling like something that must be chased. It begins to feel like something that can be aligned with. So for a moment, simply consider this idea. If the version of reality you seek already exists within the field, what might change the moment you begin observing life from that version of yourself? Sometimes the shift begins not with action, but with awareness. Stay curious, stay present, and continue observing. Because the way you observe reality may be shaping far more of it than you realize.